Welcome.
Hi.
This is episode 2 of Makers of Chains. I am Patrick.
And I am Matt. Together we are Wild Stallions.
Man, that really dates us.
Whatever. It's all time loop.
That could be Bill and Ted. That could definitely have some blockchain ramifications to the future and the past.
Yeah, well, I have a feeling that since everything is being remade and at a level where the remake of the remake is actually on someone's table, ready to be done before the first one is done, right? Spider-Man syndrome.
It's coming.
Yeah.
It's coming. Unless Hollywood changes the way that they work, which is highly unlikely.
Right. So everything being a remake, everything's timeless. Here we are again.
Carry
on, Bill.
All right. So today we wanted to talk about a few things. And we want to start off with the General's Dilemma.
Yes.
What's the other name that it goes by?
The Byzantine. I mean, there's Byzantine fault tolerance. There's Byzantine general's problem. There's the general's problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but the reason that this is so important in the blockchain world is that it creates trust where there isn't trust, where there shouldn't be trust.
Yeah. So it's based on a very sexy early 1980s white paper, putting together the notion that was the dilemma of how do you exchange information in a scenario where it's impossible to trust the other parties you're exchanging that information with. So specifically, there's multiple generals in a field that are essentially surrounding a mutual enemy, and all these generals, they don't know each other. But they're put into a situation where they're forced to trust one another. The only way they can exchange information is through a mediary. In this case, someone's running around with a scroll in hand, providing this information that needs to get from one general to the next.
So you wouldn't want to fly, you wouldn't want to shoot off fireworks or some sort of aerial signal. You wouldn't want...
No, you don't want to use... Yeah, you don't want to use Greek fire.
And if you sent like a runner or a horse, that might get intercepted, or you might see that...
Yeah, or it could be completely fraudulent, because then you're in a scenario of like, you could be... Who's to say I'm receiving the same information that everybody else is receiving?
True.
And vice versa.
Well, and that's the game of telephone that you may or may not have played when you were younger, that after you send a message through, 5 people, who knows what the message is going to end up being by you get to that 5th person.
Yes. That's the easiest exercise. And so this is just sort of the very computer science scenario to that. So it took roughly about 30 years for this dilemma to be figured out and put into a practical use case, which is Bitcoin's blockchain.
And so what does Bitcoin do to solve this?
The math to it is you're sharing a set of math proofs to an unknown party. That unknown in a public key, and you have a private key, which comes in later. You send that to this unknown party. They also have a public key and a private key. So you guys swap bits, if you will. So you exchange public keys of this math proof, and your private keys decode them. And so they're sort of mirror, without getting incredibly technical about it, they're sort of mirror images of each other. And at that point, that's how they know, they can confirm that the hash, the code, they can confirm that exchange of information as untampered. Meanwhile, you could have a third party knowing that this is going on, but they have absolutely no idea what it is that's being exchanged. So in this, a simple case would be old school world of telephone, like in the 30s and 40s when you had switchboards. The switchboard person was sort of like the genie from Aladdin, phenomenal cosmic power, itty bitty living space. But their cosmic power actually does stop. They will not hear. They'll know person A and person B and person A and the conversation. They will never be able to know what's going on in between those because they don't have access to those keys.
Well, and that scenario of like what using a telephone was like, back in the day. My mother, who's not very old, but growing up in a small town in the 60s and the early 70s, she's told me stories where she was picking up other phone conversations on in between her call. and that you can hear what your neighbor Donna is talking, to her neighbor Judith about because they're speaking in English, and if you can hear clear enough, like you're a part of that conversation. And
Yeah.
so blockchain does that, but you'd be hearing a phone conversation in a code that would be that you wouldn't be able to detect what was being spoken about.
Yeah, you're gonna be hearing a very annoying wail or whatnot. I mean, it's a snow of information, and this goes into why blockchains at worst are pseudo-anonymous, where we know when someone buys or sells or trades Bitcoin, they can look on a ledger and they can see that timestamp that this buy-sell trade occurred and that it went to another wallet address. But just looking at that, you'll never know who those two parties were involved. Now, like, if you have a lot of resources and a lot of time, you could brute force the identity, but, I mean, branching off into other conversations, that's where you would maybe also use Tor or some of these additional layers to make yourself completely anonymous.
And so to get to that point, you would know, maybe at first, just know that two people were having a conversation. You wouldn't know what the conversation was about.
Right.
You wouldn't know, like...
You're just not going to know the
context. And even to get to that point, to know which two people were communicating with each other, I mean, that takes a tremendous amount of time, energy, computing power.
Yeah, and we're talking about orders of magnitude here. We're not talking about perfection, if you will, which is usually how new technologies, they kind of get stamped with it being this new thing that's going to perfect previous technologies, when that's not really the case. But it's definitely an iterative aspect of great improvement upon a scenario. So again, this situation is it perfectly anonymous? No. Is it vastly better than anything we currently have? Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
And it does, like in the computer science world, where this was beating my head up against the wall until I was unconscious situation for computer scientists has now been solved. And not only has it been solved, but it's currently being put into practical, real scenarios.
Well, and the part that I think that's important, that I think that people are missing too, is that, in the financial world of cryptocurrency and the possibilities that blockchain has for fintech and for private companies, there's possibility and there's definitely a future there. But this technology in protecting people in places around the world, that this may mean life or death. That if you're trying to have a conversation to protect your safety, your well-being, and that, if the information being transmitted is intercepted by a dictatorship or guerrillas or people, that could be a way of, saving your life.
Yeah, and that is also a use case scenario where this is happening in Venezuela, where people are buying ASIC chips, the chipsets specifically needed to mine Bitcoin and really advantageously other hard fork cryptocurrencies like Litecoin. They're mining crypto so then they can take that crypto and buy groceries off Amazon cart or pantry to the bordering country. They've created a black market to go to that border and acquire the food, so they don't die of starvation. So this is very much, maybe we need to realign Maslow's hierarchy of needs, depending on where you live, to crypto access, because it is very much changing the game for people in third world nations or completely destabilized countries. Not only survive, but hopefully move from surviving to living.
Mm-hmm. And I like the part, too, that it creates a place where it connects people so that they can share that information for survival. It's kind of like what the internet has done. We may not know there was someone who was into Star Wars or Dungeons and Dragons in California, but now through the internet we have the power to connect with them and to know that there are more people interested in some of the same things that we are. But it also gives us the ability that, if there are people oppressed, that this is a safe and secure way for them to communicate with each other for survival, like you're saying.
Going back to one of the philosophical questions and answers that Two Generals provides is the sense of, and I mean other portions of the Bitcoin technology, but a trustless environment where this technology essentially absorbs the need to trust the party. It's sort of an anti-betrayal mechanism. Here in the States, we live in a culture that can absorb vast amounts of betrayal. On a micro level, on a macro level. Macro level is 2000, the banking crash of 2000 which was a macro betrayal event.
Right.
Whether people agree on the ways it panned out, the reality is we absorbed the betrayal, right? We're not homeless in a gutter as a culture, right? Individuals sustain that blow, but as a culture, we were able to absorb it one way or another. Individuals and societies in third world nations can absorb that level of betrayal. It's costing life, family members.
And if they do, it may be a generational thing. It may take 3 generations of people to absorb that and to move life forward in a positive manner, where, like what you're saying here in America, that it took some time, but we absorbed it and then we're moving on. But it is not as life or death as opposed to what other people might be experiencing.
As a culture, it did not. Starbucks kept running, malls kept running, the New York Stock Exchange kept running. It's altered and some would say mutated to an extent. But again, generally speaking, as a society, our day-to-day life carried on. And we're not enduring the day-to-day problems of what someone in a third world, if a dictator is killed, that's the crazy thing. Like, dictators can be in power and they can be causing mass damage by whatever cruelty they're imposing. And it's actually more destabilizing if they get taken out by coup, by murder. That's the levels of randomness and chaos that they're dealing with. So when you put a smartphone with a Bitcoin wallet and a crypto wallet in someone's hands, where it's now a way to make transactions, it's a bank, it's an insurance company in some capacity, to an individual, when that entire community doesn't even have something like that. They're able to bypass the realities that we have here in the States, which is a different way of introducing blockchain and crypto into a space. But it also shows how differently societies, based on their levels of need financially, are going to adapt to this.
Right. Well, and that's the part too that one of the things that you and I have discussed in our motivation to do this podcast and to create content to share with people is that a lot of the media attention around Bitcoin and blockchain is around the financial benefits, the how much it's worth, the up and the down, and where the world views the possibilities with blockchain in a much different manner because of solving this dilemma that trusting someone on the other end of a transaction, that's something that we've never had in this manner before.
Yeah, and it's a great use case of basic anthropological evolution, where these countries that are so bereft services and systems and access to resources that we take for granted, sort of accelerating their evolutionary process. Like Kenya is literally Wakanda when it comes to financial tech models. They're using cell phone minutes as their form of currency primarily. The next would probably crypto, Bitcoin, whatever, but that space. And there's by evolutionary need to survive, they're bypassing the last 150 years of our financial evolution. Right. That is being played out in other places in the world. If you look at Estonia and what they've already implemented, how they've implemented crypto, and also the pushback with a lot of nations. India is seeing a lot of pushback. China, Korea, on some levels. Here in New York, you have to get a license to be involved in this space.
Well, there's so much more time we could spend on this, but I definitely want to change gears a little bit and talk about crypto value versus the value of gas.
Sure.
I'm gonna toss you out a situation that I overheard and experienced, and then I want you to help the listeners understand this. So I went to a presentation, myself and about 60 other people were listening to a blockchain presentation. Excellent presentation. Over the course of it, they were talking about using Ether and how much Ether it was going to take to run some transactions. Now, a gentleman raised his hand and he asked, hey, isn't that really expensive to use that Ether, since one Ether at the time was worth roughly $900 to $1,000.
Yeah.
Now, there's a difference between the value of the Ether and then also the ether being used on the platform. So how could you to explain to someone that may not understand the difference between those two?
You have to backtrack a little bit to set the record straight of the improper use of terms in this industry, where people think that coin and cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and tokens, this is all interchangeable. They're all synonyms to one another, which is completely not the case. You have cryptocurrency, is sort of your umbrella, and then you have Bitcoin, which is on a blockchain, and then you'll have things like altcoins, which is everything else.
So there's Bitcoin, which is a cryptocurrency.
Yep.
And then altcoins
are Litecoin, they're Monero, they're Ripple, they're and there's varying reasons as to how those all function as altcoins. Like they have more coins being distributed or mined over a period of time. They're using different cryptography, all that thing. But the reality, they're all altcoins. And then you get into the next layer, which is your decentralized app, which is what Ethereum is, which is what Ether is powered by. And within a decentralized app, you create a smart contract, which then allows you to produce tokens. So tokens are polyutilitarian in the sense that they can be whatever you want to assign value. So if you want to assign value to attention, if you want to assign it to time, if you want to create a token that manages invoices or something like that, you can assign it to votes on something, you can use it to assign to, or on a social media channel. So all those sorts of ideas and many more. So they do have specific use cases and needs. So with Ethereum, you're producing tokens. You want to do it in a test net, a sandbox in development space, where you create your app or your dApp and you begin to test it. And the next derivation from token, you have gas. Gas is a way to explain the next innovation of this blockchain space, where gas defines Ether as a polyutility. So Ether can be bought, sold, purchased on an exchange. You can accept Ether as a form of payment if you have a wallet on your phone or on your laptop. But then in addition, as a developer, I will use Ether to test executions or transactions. And in those transactions, there's data collected to them. Whatever that data is. If it's visual data, it's photographs. If it's a spreadsheet with financial information, if it's a book, it doesn't matter. So you want to do all that in the test net, where you can invent infinite amount of fake Ether to test all day long what you're building in the space.
So in the test net, you may have 100 Ether, and then as you run through those transactions, your gas will go down.
Yep.
But that you're not using $10,000, $20,000 to work in that sandbox to test that.
Yeah. So as a developer, it is also very important to be aware of this, because it requires very few missteps to figure out, oh my god, I'm actually withdrawing real Ether and it's going to nowhere. It's going to a fictitious wallet that I don't have access to, or something of that nature. Once you are very familiar with the space, you can play with all the Ether you want, and it also is a measure of derivatives. You can you can move the decimal point on Ether out to the power of 16 or something like that. So you can 0.016 decimal points out, and that's called a WEI, or WEI. So you can derivate it substantially for whatever your purpose might be. But that's also the case in the real world, where you don't have to buy a full Ether. You can buy $10 worth of Ether.
Right.
Yeah.
So where do you think that misconception and that problem with people understanding the difference, though? Just that, the developer versus the person that doesn't know a lot about the development of the blockchain app, and that we really monetize and think of the value of things.
We're dealing with pure abstraction for the most part here, even in the developer space, but they're used to interacting in pure abstraction. That's the whole point of a command line. When we're just not at a space yet in this industry where the GUI, the graphic user interface, it's not a priority, because we're still making sure, I love Bugattis, but one of the reasons I love it is because of what's under the hood. I'm not necessarily interested in the body of the Bugatti. We got to make sure that engine works, that it steers. It has an exhaust that works. The car's not going to blow up. So we're, in a lot of ways, we're still in that space where we got to make sure that this whole thing's running before we put a shell on top of it and make it pretty and functional from a visual standpoint.
Right. When you're talking about, so like we use Ethereum and we're talking about Ether as an example, what are some other examples of platforms that are both traded as a cryptocurrency or an altcoin that also double as a platform for developers like yourself to work on creating smart contracts, working on different types of developments?
I mean, there's Python libraries that do this a lot, but it's not as uniform as Ether. Like that's sort of the bread and butter. That's a go-to, and because testing is free, it has that attribute of just produce whatever you want. It's very appealing to a lot of people just work in that stable environment, because over the last 15 years, there's just been a lot of ADD in the development world where everyone wants to create their JavaScript library or whatever, and they're all very unstable, and that attitude has sort of been brought into the blockchain development space, and that's really it. Rust has some libraries, Go has some libraries, which is Google's object-oriented language platform. I would say EOS, but that's still in beta.
Yeah. So when we're talking about, I just wanted to I know that you're a big fan of his, but with Ethereum, just give a little shout out to Vitalik.
Yeah, Captain Rainbow Cat. Yeah. Yep.
Pronounce his last name?
I don't know how to pronounce it. Buterin, Buterin. I've heard both.
Buterin
sounds like a drug. Fine.
Yeah. So yeah, genius mastermind behind Ethereum. Smart cat.
Yeah, so he was 19, I believe, when he published the white paper for the concept of Ethereum. And then his co-collaborator, Gavin Wood, primarily responsible for the development of Solidity, which is the object-oriented language used to write in Ethereum.
Solidity?
Solidity, yeah. Yep.
So just to go a little side chain off of talking about gas versus crypto, let's talk a little bit about energy. So
sure.
Depending on how deep that you've dove into blockchain crypto world, you probably heard something about energy consumption. Now, is it the story that's been going around saying that the Bitcoin mining in the world right now is using the equivalent of energy to like Denmark, or funny memes that are going around?
Sure.
Showing pictures of what the energy consumption of someone mining Bitcoin might look like. Could be any of those things, but it's definitely a concern right now. So how would you explain to someone the amount of energy or what it takes to mine, to be running?
Approaching this question requires considering a couple of things simultaneously that seem maybe on the outside contradictory. One of them is the difference of short-term gains, long-term gains. In the short term, it is preposterous to mine specifically Bitcoin. Really, if you don't have $50 million laying around and a lot of smart people, it is absurd to... It's an exercise in futility to mine Bitcoin.
So what you're saying is it would just be easier to take cash down to an ATM and buy Bitcoin out of a Bitcoin ATM.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which we'll be talking about later in this episode.
Yep.
Just a little.
Yep. There's two mining pools.
Well, and there are videos too. Like if you get caught up with like going on the YouTube and you end up on a YouTube video, it will tell you exactly how to mine Bitcoin and how much money depending on your zip code.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's websites that Crypto Compares one they'll break down for you the value, what you're mining per day, per week in comparison to the gigahash, which is the difference of like hashing. In mining, you want to take a hash and you want it to work in Congress with a target, and once that is met and put into the space, the miners confirm that this actually happened, this is the thing that happens every 10 minutes on Bitcoin's blockchain. If you make that magical connection occur and the mining community comes to a consensus on it, you magically win your Bitcoin, assuming there isn't any other protocols going on, like you're trying to get 10,000 Bitcoin out of it as opposed to 12.5. But again, that requires a lot of power, and also is a matter of putting out the difference of what mining is and running a full node. Those are two entirely separate things, but a lot of people that aren't familiar with this world enough make those interchangeable, and we can talk about running nodes separately. The amount of gigahashes that are going on is, I don't know, it's hard to like manage right now. But there's two pools in China that on any given day, 45% of the total amount of Bitcoin that's being mined collectively. And they're burning through, they're easily burning through 30, 40K worth of these ASIC chips a day, because that's how they're just running 24/7. Now, if you want to get into smaller coins, that's very much a possibility.
When you say smaller coins, you're talking about altcoins. So
altcoins, yeah.
Not Bitcoin, a different...
Yeah.
And there still may be places for that you're not losing out to the mining pools in China. So there are possibilities.
Right. It's also what it's costing you as an actual electric bill, which is profound. But again, that also goes into what it's costing you short term to mine this thing. Now, if you're looking at it from the perspective of a community and you have a few dollars to burn buying Bitcoin nonchalance, I would maybe even suggest going to mining, specifically for the point of, for every person that becomes part of this group and mining, that's the thing that makes up Bitcoin. That's the only way it is the world-class security protocol that it is. It's better than anything we've ever had.
So it's a thin line between continuing to encourage people to engage in the blockchain community and like the movement,
right,
as opposed to hearing that, well, there's no chance to become a Bitcoin millionaire or an altcoin millionaire, so I'm just gonna give up and try to make money some other way.
Sure, and it's not even necessarily like I'm telling you to take this money and spend it. It's an exercise in looking at money as a tool and saying, how can I contribute to this community, and understanding the reality of what that is doing for the community and how this thing works. Without mining, we don't have Bitcoin. So someone has to do it, whether they're looking to make millions or conceivably or not. If they're all in it as a way to become wealthy, that's one thing, but incidentally or deliberately, they are also contributing to the strength of this ledger.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's something too that you and I have talked about, maybe speaking on episode 3 or further on down the road in this podcast series, is talking about incentives, the incentive of mining, and how maybe we envision that evolving, in the next 6 months to a year, 5 years, because it will in its current form, it works, but it will have to evolve and change into something else.
Yeah, it's evolving. It's evolving now, generally, as new blockchains are being developed and ways to make Bitcoin more mainstream and more to offset some of the problems of scale, costs, which are a deterrent for people that want to get involved, but they see, they hear even me just saying, no, it's really expensive. Some of those solutions are being done. They're talking about the Lightning Network, which we could spend a whole half episode talking about. These ideas of side channels, state channels, which are like subdirectories on a blockchain that just represent the absolute necessary information that needs to get moved on. It's not all of the data from the previous block, and this is a way to speed up the latency problems. And
so you wouldn't need to carry the entire blockchain ledger in its entirety on.
Yeah. So if someone's trying to hash the entire series of friends in 4K, there would be a way to offload the absolutely necessary information that isn't those terabytes of data onto a sidechain or a state channel and move it on. So in some ways it works similar to how websites work now. You go to a website and you see it loading, and in the old days it would have to load everything at one time. Now JavaScript allows for asynchronous loading, so it can pull and sort of cache at the same time. And that process is able to offset loading to a large extent. So it's a similar sort of deal with sidechaining and that sort of thing.
And that goes back to some of what you talked about earlier about the development on the back end is figuring out how to do it, and that what it ends up looking like, and is it sexy, is it look right, that will come with time. But that's a part of how the blockchain is evolving.
Definitely. There's going to be what Bitcoin looks like culturally or from an engineering perspective is going to be vastly different in 5 years, one way or another, to fulfill scale needs, to fulfill consensus needs, which would be forking, to fulfill not mining needs. Yeah, and that goes with all the derivatives, because that's really it. Altcoins, they're all sort of progeny of Bitcoin.
Right. All right. Next on the list of the episode for today. We wanted to talk about real-world disruptive areas that blockchain, maybe changing the world. And I think that you wanted to talk about an example from an Avengers movie.
Let me see here.
What if you want to save the world, but you don't want to change it?
Well, I mean, this goes into the consistent philosophical questions and topics that this is bringing up into spaces that want to get into this, but they don't know how to apply it. When in turn, when you talk about censorship-resistant, peer-to-peer, decentralized ledger, like I always go back to the best way to explain that is if the Medicis in Renaissance Florence did all of their books in front of the entire city of Florence, right? Now apply that to a bank, apply that to an insurance company, apply that to any sort of financial institution. Do you think we would have a drastically different? Would they do things drastically different? And B, would the product that they're providing now that everyone has eyes potentially on what they're doing?
And that's going to like the human nature of how we act and what we choose to do when we're being watched. Right. That I think that the research has shown that as humans, when people are watching, we may be more likely to have that pack mentality of like following along with what other people are doing. Yeah. Now, if we're doing something on the blockchain, how will our behavior be different?
First thing I think of is the Heisenberg principle, which Jeff Goldblum so succinctly talked about in Jurassic Park, where the moment you start observing something, its original state changes. That's an interesting question. What does human society look like behaviorally when it's always being observed?
True.
How much does it change? Like, are we perpetually on good behavior? This is taking 1984 in a sense and reversing it on its head, whereas always being watched was equated to a negative impact, but we've easily embraced always being watched.
Well, and the part too is that like being connected with people that share a common mission or a common goal too. That how will that impact our decision making and our behavior? Not having to go through a third party or an intermediary to reach a person that we want to have transact with or be connected to share information or goods with. That how will that change our behavior and how we function within that?
Yeah, and I question that Mighty Fine Marvel quote was also alluding to, and going back to two generals, of reorganizing what it is, we don't trust in society, which fill in the blank. Media, government, sports, Hollywood, Facebook, Google, police. Maybe not, again, individually, like we're all different on that sense, but culturally we seem to have a massive identity crisis, and one of those things is we trust nothing.
Right.
And that is a sort of prime opportunity for technology that we will absorb all those things you don't trust, or we potentially could. Now, and that goes into something called the Decentralized Autonomous Organization, which tried to be implemented. The first one tried to be implemented a couple of years ago. It failed miserably, but it's a novel concept of a full-scale city, a community running on a DAO,
right,
where all of those things that I just mentioned are now being automated, right? There's no point of human corruption in those spaces. There's no politician that can be bought off. There's no police commissioner that has something to hide. Same thing with a judge. That would all be managed in a smart contract or something of that nature. And that's another thing. How does society adjust to that thing? It's sort of the Matrix.
Right.
When Agent Smith talked about, we tried to create utopia and society rejected it. So we literally replicated the world as it was. And this is even before AI or anything like that. Because you would still have human developers needing to build these things. So there's still sort of who will guard the guards, but it is a vastly different reality.
Right. I'm going to throw some real world examples out at you.
Yeah.
I want you just to give me, a lot of people, and even, you and I included, we believe that this would be disruptive in, fill in the blank, that there will be aspects of this that can change every industry. I'm going to throw some examples out at you.
Yeah.
Let me know what you think. Banking, I think we could.
Well, a Bitcoin wallet is your bank.
Voting.
Yeah, voting. That was one of the actually first things that my friend and I started talking about in 2011 when we read the white paper by Satoshi, was how this could completely change elections, assuming our society would still operate under those tenets.
Right.
And
that I think of along the lines of polling and research and voting, just the process of what we have to go through in an election cycle.
Yeah.
That would be very easily to eliminate a lot of that and just on a blockchain, at X amount of time, let it be a day, a month, or a year, you would have the opportunity to submit your your vote, and that it would just really streamline the entire process. Everyone's vote would count. It would count in the same way. And
dead people aren't voting. There's no double spending, if you will. There's no double voting. There's some verification process for one person, one vote. If we want to stick to that rule, which is actually an 800-year-old concept developed by a Spanish monk, and everyone would have a public key, and the voting mechanism would have a private key of some capacity, and essentially your vote is your transaction.
Right. Well, and within that, I see the process of like registering to vote being the more intricate, stressful part of that, not the actual voting piece, and that the having to actually go to a poll to vote, and our current process, especially here in the United States, that this could alleviate and save so much money along so many parts of our country having to deal with that.
Yeah, still would just have a window, but troops overseas could just, okay, here's the window, put in my vote, done, on my phone or on a laptop or whatever. People that can't get to polling booths, that sort of thing. I imagine there would actually probably be more activity at libraries for people, quote unquote, people that don't have access personally.
Right. Blockchain for music and entertainment.
That's easy enough. Ironically, Metallica would benefit highly from this. Right? So every big band or whatever musician, they have their community, and you can tokenize for that space, move away from record companies, from those intermediaries, the lawyers. There's a lot of dictation there, and it's literally the musician and fan, and you have the exchange of value. So the obvious one would be music,
right?
The sort of the iterative process, not big activities in Patreon, so between musician and fan, but that's still the traditional system of fiat things. Now we're getting in the place of like, okay, you two could create a token, a U2 token, the streets have no value or whatever, and that's how you're a fan in that space. So it's sort of like a glorified gift card, and you can use it to buy your way into better seats to a show, exclusive music, all that sort of thing.
And
FaceTime.
That's the part about directly connecting fans with fill in the blank, whatever type of artist, you want to connect with, is that a lot of the times the fans really care about the experience of meeting the artist or going to a concert, having access to content that the general public wouldn't have general access to, and that has a value to the fan, but not necessarily the community, the entire world as a whole.
Yeah, and especially when you're not dealing with the U2s of the world, and you're dealing with upstart musicians and artists, they no longer have to worry about who they have to bow down to in a record
label, distribution label.
Like lawyers on that level. They can find a developer, right, or something that'll help them design a token. And at some point, the barrier of entry will be like as easy as building a website now.
Right.
In the meantime, like that, I mean, yeah, the anxiety, right? What the FUD? Fear, anxiety.
Fear, anxiety,
FUD?
I keep thinking of Elmer Fudd.
Yeah. I mean, it eliminates all those potential problems, those costs for those that are really into
fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
There it is. Fear, your FUD factor goes down quite a bit. I would imagine if you're wanting to be the next Bob Dylan-ish person, an immediate way to get closer to your fans and getting all that other corporate sort of stuff out of the way.
Insurance, car insurance.
Well, there's my crazy idea in the sense that if everyone has a dash cam or 360 cameras, they have cameras in their back seats now, whatever. You tokenize that. You remove witnesses, if you will. If everyone has cameras, when a car accident event happens, there's no doubt of like what's going on. But if you tokenize with your neighborhood or any number of, I guess, different iterations, you could be an insurance company within that group. Well, now they're absorbing that risk.
And within that space, it's great too, because how do you make a safer community? Well, you band together and kind of make a cooperative or insurance company to make sure that you and all your neighbors are being safe and driving around your community, and that you support each other if something does happen.
Yeah, and there's been the argument of whether they work or not, but as a result of our major healthcare laws from 2011 or 10, these sort of co-ops of people that can't afford health insurance, they essentially pitch in what they can as a membership every month, but it's collectively a war chest absorbing all these bills for people. So when people need that 80 grand because their wife has cancer or whatever, these systems sort of absorb that, but it's still under sort of old rules of there's still levels of intermediary intermediaries involved be slimmed down even more. So you could have direct peer-to-peer relationships with people, which may embolden, like, hey, I mean, now I know this person a little bit more, and I'm more than willing to give that particular person a little bit more than I would generally to the pool.
Right. And to kind of segue from that, from like health insurance to healthcare in general, I'm very passionate about what blockchain can do for health records. That having health record systems on a blockchain would give power from the insurance companies and from the hospitals themselves, and give access to records back to the individual, and that being able to share it with different doctors and providers in a more seamless manner. There's so many possibilities within blockchain for the individual that I'm really excited about. What about supply chain? This is kind of an interesting one that I can see some places, the future of supply chain management.
Yes, I recall reading about a number of companies doing this outside of the United States, of the whole, like, we call it farm to table sort of attitude, and there's different versions of that, but be able to track something absolutely from the place it's coming out of the ground and everywhere in between, which it holds everyone accountable simultaneously, sort of equally, but then everything from being able to directly inform a customer that is into buying local, to having the actual, this banana they're buying, or this corn stock they're buying, or this beer they're buying, or whatever it is, that will reduce the costs. Specifically, we're dealing with fruit that needs to go from Florida to Washington or here, or like, I mean, I know working in grocery, like as a teenager, Nash Finch was here, and how unorganized that was, distributing fruit to everybody.
Yeah.
And it just came down to, all right, you're the big mover and shaker, you get the best quality, and then by the time it gets to the mom and pop shop, you're already throwing away half your stuff.
Well, and the part about like blockchain being, trusting a trustless system is that it would go to a point where we wouldn't even have to necessarily like put too much effort into it. We would just know that if the product was coming from here, that it would be trusted, that if it would fall into this category of being organic, fresh, we knew where it was coming from and within this date. And that not having to pay, the part of it that I'm really excited about is that to get food that's farm to table food, like you were talking about, in a manner that doesn't mean paying 4 times as much for a potato being, $5 instead of $1, just because to know that. And that
definitely goes into a whole, I mean, this goes into such a crazy world, because a farmer could create their own token. I mean, you as an investor, you could co-op with the farmer directly. And I know there's weird little small services that do this now, where you kind of pay a membership and you get a box full of goodies from farmers here in Minnesota, and you have to go pick them up somewhere. But if a farmer has their own token system, then in addition using that technology to manage their supply chain, they could get all their crop to all the people that want it. They could deplete their crop very quickly to everyone that wants it. And so like grocery stores and things worrying about rotten or bad, because it's just, here's a warehouse, we buy it, we're hoping to sell it. The hope is just based on someone comes in and needs a banana. It's not getting the bananas to all the people that want the bananas.
Gift cards.
Yeah. Tokens are a gift card on steroids.
Right. And the nice part too is that a gift card if you purchase $20 at your local craft brewery as a gift card, that it wouldn't expire after 12 months just because there was an arbitrary date put on the back of the gift card. It would be in the block, it would exist, and that stored value would always be there for you.
Yeah, and easily enough you can, if I have a $20 Starbucks gift card, how likely is that I'm going to be able to sell it to someone even at Starbucks for $20?
Well, they wouldn't trust you. They would think there was like a scam, or it wouldn't, there was something behind.
But if you have a service where a local coffee shop sells digital blockchain versions of gift cards, everyone could have their own sort of, what is that, StubHub? Like, look, I'm really just trying to get rid of this gift card. I'll sell it to you for 75% of its value, if that's associated to a token. I literally can just be like, oh, buy it, and then
transfer it.
And transfer it flawlessly, fee-free more than likely.
What about charity? What do you see blockchain doing for charities?
Well, this is all looking at things with rose-colored glasses, just purely in the sense of what is possible to develop for places. Obviously, mass abuse can exist in this. Obviously, there's mass abuse in charities now. The ability to raise funds by way of tokens, ICOs, that sort of thing. I don't necessarily know how that's going to pan out regulatory-wise. That's a brave new world. But ICOs, in terms of raising funds, have have already shown that it's going to make venture cap obsolete really quick. The amount of money raised in America for ICOs last year was 4 times the amount of traditional VC. So if you were to apply people that are really good at doing that into the nonprofit space, I would imagine that the pain that is raising funds for a 501c3 could potentially drastically be reduced.
Right. Well, taking it for like even the smaller like individual scenarios, that it would be nice too that if an individual did own they did own a Bitcoin, or they did own a significant amount of other altcoins, that if they did want to share some of that with a charity, that they would have the ability to do that in a really easy manner, to kind of share with the charities that have the missions that they supported and that they felt connected to. And that's the part where, you know, it would be nice to be able to do that. I even think of like a real world scenario of, like, for example, I donate to Goodwill. So if I have extra clothes or extra DVDs or, you know, random things around the house, instead of throwing it away, go to the Goodwill and drop it off. Now they will ask you if you'd like a slip of paper to use
for a deduction
for your taxes every year. And it's a slip of paper, but how great would it be to go there and to be put on a blockchain that you did make a donation and that it existed within that, so that you could have access to that at tax time, or to know who are the people that are donating to these nonprofits to help their local communities.
Yeah, I mean, it also, I think of the way it could open up reputation as a system of value. Like on LinkedIn, I can post, I worked with this charity, I did this, that sort of thing. I mean, that's cool, but like, we can make it better. If nonprofits simply issued tokens and you just literally wanted to be like, okay, I have 600 tokens invested in fill in the blank charity, people can look at that and be like, okay, all right, this person has committed a lot of value into this charity, right, and that can be used for, I don't know, finding a job, like what, I mean, who knows, right? Who knows? But like the key thing is being able to invent new types of value as ways of measuring reputation that have been lost, that haven't existed, that would be to be able to quantify value in things that haven't existed.
Right. So there are many other possible disruptive use cases. Those are just a couple.
I mean, the big one right now is best use case for the layman is decentralized social media. By far, in a way, the lowest barrier of entry and the simplest way of looking at how blockchain's changing things.
So decentralized YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, is that?
Yeah, sort of fill in the blank. There's a couple for Twitter. One's Rory, the other one is I can't recall. We could put that on our website. Steepshot is decentralized Instagram. Steam is decentralized Facebook. DTube is decentralized YouTube. And for those that cultural pushback of some of these with their censorship. Well, these decentralized ones are censorship resistant, permanent. There's no chain, no one's going on there and making your stuff disappear. And you don't need permission to put anything on there. You create an account and you start creating content. And then the community determines if it's valuable. The difference is, you know, of all the thousands of hours over 10 years, one may have put into putting cat videos or whatever on Facebook, they've made zero money on any of that.
Right.
So if you make 15 cents posting a meme, 15 cents
15 more cents than you would have before.
Yeah.
Well, and the part that I like about the opportunities now in that space is that the point of entry is slim to none. That, you know, if you've created some sort of content that you do feel might be valuable to someone else, or someone else might be interested in like viewing, that go ahead, get into it. But that, you know, being on YouTube or Instagram or, you know, Twitter, that you're not going against, you know, 10 million other people who are doing the same thing, and that there's opportunities to connect with other people that are like-minded that might be interested in the same thing as you.
Yeah, as an early adopter, it's advantageous to get in for a number of reasons. How and when it scales, mass adoption or acceptance. Again, the sort of reality is that your community and the community determines what's valuable.
Well, right? it goes back to like,
you're not subservient to ads.
Right.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what internet content and what was when it first started, that people were doing it for a passion or because that they enjoyed it, they wanted to connect with other people, and that they weren't doing it for fill in the blank. That they're excited about something, they're passionate about something, and that they want to be a part of a community.
I imagine because of human behavior, things will change, but I mean the ad revenue aspect put a tremendous wedge between content producer and content user. And these are the people from Facebook saying, yeah, we knew this was a dopamine producer and we did it anyway. That poor dude that did 2 years because of Silk Road. He built a website that allowed people to sell drugs. So he did 2 years for that. And then we have companies that are peddling stuff to you that they know is altering your brain chemistry and manipulating your brain chemistry, and they're multi-billion-dollar.
Well, and that's the part too that, like, if you want to talk about amateur versus professional, that a lot of YouTubers and Instagram, Twitter, they're professionals, full-time job, profession, however you want to call it. That it went away from amateur people doing for the passion to being more about bottom line.
Yeah, and you have companies what do? They bring in clinical psychologists. They're like, oh great, how do we manipulate people above the fold on a website? Like, what sort of colors do we need? Where do logos need to be? What do they look like? How are they shaped? The level of manipulation at this point, impartial to also knowing the level of research we have with neuroscience, obviously compared to 100 years ago or the days of Edward Bernays and things like that, is profound, and it's being used. A book I can't, like, if you don't nothing about web development, just read the book Evil by Design. It came out, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and it goes into explicit detail. Like, yeah, this is how UX UI manipulates you to get you to stay on a website, to lead you to hitting this, tapping or clicking on this button. These are the colors we use. We use them specifically for these reasons. When you go to a movie theater, why does sweat bead off of an ice cube? Well, they're inferring something other than, hey, this is Coca-Cola or soda.
Evil by Design by Chris Notter?
Correct, yes.
2013.
Yeah, and so obviously some of the technological aspects have altered a little bit, but generally it's a great analysis of this is how the industry works.
Well, so lots of different industries, and yeah, the social media aspect of kind of like how some of that stuff will play out. Check out DTube, check out Steemit.
Yeah, I mean those are the two big ones, I think.
They're and it's just like early YouTube, just like early internet. Like you have to sift through to find what you're looking for, but
yeah, the search isn't sophisticated. There's you can look at things by topics, and you can follow people, and your curation is then altered to that effect. But yeah, I mean Steemit's still in beta, so if you were to talk about what Steemit could look like in 5 years, especially when the more people that get involved, because it is a token, it is a coin to some capacity, because you can exchange it, or you can exchange it for Bitcoin, fiat, all that sort of thing. They're worth like $4 something right now. Steemit bucks are $30, $40, $50 in a couple of years. And a lot of that could just be because of mass migration, right?
From different
value, right?
Yeah.
Similar to like how IPOs work for companies is interest, but it's more on the ground, right? That peer-to-peer sort of relationship. But it's also used as a token.
So it serves both purposes?
Yeah, you can use Steemit to like promote yourself, so it's sort of like built-in advertisement. Like the people that follow you, the things you tag to, it's not overtly complicated yet. Yeah, but it's very cool. Hey, it's very cool.
Yeah. All right, well, I think that's going to wrap it up here for episode 2.
Yeah, we're going to turn down the water hose spigot a little bit.
Yeah.
No need to drink from it much longer.
All right, so this is Patrick, and
I'm Matt.
And I think we're going to continue to sign off with May the Fork be with you.
May the Fork be with you.